Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Just as a short introduction, Dani Roach I'm someone that I've known for 41 years. We had a joke at work when we used to work together. We would often show up wearing the same thing without talking to each other. One week, as a joke, we planned our wardrobe so that every day we wore the same thing to see if anybody would notice. I can't remember the result of that small experiment, but Dani in her all their life is an artist. Some people that have been in my home have seen some of her excellent works of art. But what we're doing today is a result of Dani is part of a group of women that meet at my house every other month. We've been meeting since the last election. Joy is an act of resistance is our motto. And she came to one of my lunch meetings and talked about this book, Calling In. And I said, that's excellent. And you know, it's exactly what I think a lot of people in this current environment are looking for. Examples of how can we have conversations, specifically with people we love, people that are members of our family that we don't want to just completely shut out, but we're having a difficult time having conversations with them because they don't necessarily have the same worldview we have. So what we're going to do today, we'll keep an eye on the clock. I'm going to just give it a very short general overview. Dani has more personal experiences using the tips and techniques of her family, and I'm going to let her share that information. But just to get started, in terms of the first 3 chapters, a lot of the book is about her personal experiences and the background of her life, which includes the fact that she was a victim of rape, victim of incest. She was a single mother, so her life plan changed when she became pregnant. But one of the things that's particularly pertinent about or important in her message is a message of empathy, forgiveness, hope, and joy. And I think that if anybody did anybody here have a chance to look at her YouTube video? Okay. Well, if you get a chance to watch the YouTube video, she has an exuberance and a joyfulness. She has worked with rape survivors. She has also worked with prisoners who were accused of rape that wanted to learn how to stop that cycle of violence. She's attended Ku Klux Klan meetings, and she has helped someone transition from being a white supremacist to being an ally. She's been a social activist for more than 50 years, and she's had a variety of experiences in terms of her work life and what she's focused on. She started as a rape counselor, worked with rapists, and then she's moved on to other activities. And she was a co-founder of the National Center for Human Rights Education. So her work has transitioned into human rights. We're not going to cover every chapter in detail, but we do want to talk about how to create a calling culture. And we're going to be using some of the tips and techniques that she's shared, along with personal experiences. So I just want to give a couple of highlights for the first few chapters of the book, because she is focusing on, first, you have to learn the power of forgiveness. You have to be able to have forgiveness. The other thing is when you're looking at someone else and you're dealing with starting a difficult conversation, is assume the best in others. Assume the best. And then the other thing is, one of her concepts is there is joy in the culture of being curious and learning new things. That's what you're doing if you're engaging in a conversation with someone that you may not necessarily engage with and agree with. And she also talks about starting from a position of look for the things that connect you. So what are things that, if you're dealing with someone, especially in your family life, what are the things that connect you? And I just want to give a few quotes that are highlights, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dani. So she wrote on page 108, I've organized my philosophy of calling expressly to replace those fearful environments with ones of joy, growth, and fellowship. It's been my pathway to inner peace and better self-care. It boosts my self-esteem and makes me less vulnerable to my insecurities. And then on page 21, she says, we can inspire people, bring them joy and exuberance by being hopeful and empathetic. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dani, and we will have a conversation after.
When I shared this book with Terri at her house, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a backstory about me and why that became so important. I don't know if you saw my bio, but I'm the youngest of 9, and I am married to a woman who is the youngest of 9. And I have a sibling clan now from that group of 9 that extends to 123 living descendants, spouses, and children. And they are as diverse as a group that size might be. Every political party, every religion, we are rural, we are urban, every level of education, from not even high school graduates through to doctors. Every facet of the LGBTQIA community is included. So I come from that very large family and was part of the committee planning our family reunion for 2025 in July. And I saw Loretta Ross on 60 Minutes. So if you want a little shorter version or an interview version, you can look for 60 Minutes interview with her. And I had been just stewing about how I was going to approach some of my family members at this reunion. And she had a way of flipping the conversation. In the past, or in general, I come from a vision of what's next? Could I gotcha? I throw the in advance of range game. 60-minute interview talked about her strategy of not calling out people, which is what I am so naturally bent for, and calling them in. And just her phrase of leaning forward and saying, tell me more to your opponent, to the person who is sharing an opinion that is the absolute opposite of yours. So the timing of that was great. Picked up a copy of the book immediately. How much could I read before the reunion? And I have a nephew. I'll give him a name, Mick. And he tends to be on this side of everything, and I'm on that side. And he was one of the people I was preparing for. The main gathering and the evening meal, I mean, this thing has souvenirs, all programming. We have an 8-page newsletter. I mean, this is some family love. He came in, he's about 60 and was wearing a Gulf of America shirt, showing his pride and his strength. And I chose not to comment on it. This was not a time and a place, and this was not a discussion we were going to have. I actually didn't want to hear more. I checked myself. Could I be honest and say, tell me more? No, I couldn't. So that was one check. And then there is a history with him of being very dramatic. He gave the blessing for the meal, and people in his family clapped. I don't clap for blessings, but that obviously is important support for him. When we were doing the family photos, the previous reunion, he had insisted we set up an empty chair for a brother of mine who's been gone 60 years. We went through the motions, and afterwards, my siblings said, let's never do that again. That was a horrible experience. It'd been 60 years. And so many of my siblings had just lost spouses. We weren't putting out chairs for them. So it was the drama of suddenly confronting the 8 surviving siblings with this setup until people were crying. And then the whole crowd, they're crying. So I knew it was going to fall on me to say something. And this is when he said, Aunt Dani, where's the empty chair? And I put the hugest smile on my face and thought, do this with love. And I said, Mick, we've done that before. We're okay this time. We got it. Are you sure? You don't want an empty chair? No, we're okay. Thank you. And so back to the book. The personal experiences she covers, especially in chapter 4, when she goes into depth about meeting with a KKK member, or not neo-Nazi, who wanted to get out, is about leaving room for that person to change, leaving room for the person to change and grow. And she highlights valuing growth over punishment, including your own personal growth. And I really have learned after reading her book and pondering this and seeing more situations, I'm really more clear that I don't value calling out as much as I had. I don't value the cancel culture, the Karens, the checking other people. She goes on about, in terms of the value, value kindness over humiliation. That one I had absolutely reversed. If I could humiliate someone, I was doing good. Value joy over shame, and value fellowship over fraction. And the remainder of her book really offers step-by-step techniques for a calling in culture. And it's woven with her personal stories and humor, and I'm sure you would agree, she's a very vibrant person. You want to hear, you want to listen to. And don't be surprised that the first step in chapter 5 is starting with the self. How often do I, when I'm in a conflict, stop and start with myself? And I now more take a pause and ask, what's my intention here? Why do I need to engage? Do I want to lean forward? Is this a person that I want to continue this relationship, grow this relationship, tighten this relationship? Because answering those questions is going to have I'm going to have a different response moving forward. After the hard work is done on starting with yourself, she talks about calibrating the conflict, that there are times to just call off, to not call out, to not someone and shame them. And maybe you're not in a position to call them in and bring them closer, but there are some times you need to call off. And she talks about accepting the reaction from them and leaving room for that. Leaving room, because you're not going to have a dialogue. There's not going to be change here. There's not going to be growth here if you've left no room for you to hear, engage with whatever the response is from that person. And as I was preparing for this, and I was talking to my wife about the different things I was thinking about and examples in my head, and she said, okay, you didn't call Mick out at all for his Gulf of America shirt. Is there a saying on a shirt you would have called out? Where you would have taken him aside, where it would have been an example where you felt compelled, because sometimes a joke is shared in a room and everyone is going, that was so bad, and nobody wants to say anything. And someone, as Loretta talks about, an uncle, and she gives examples on how to do it with love and gently, and starting the whole process with, Uncle Joe, I know you to be a man of faith. I know you to care about, and it's one of the examples she uses in the YouTube. I know you to care about people, and you'd do anything to save someone in trouble. I just need to tell you that comment you made doesn't jive with the uncle I know. So there are ways to do it, and I run through my head the scenarios, and I run through my head that would motivate me to do it in public, to do it in private, and thinking about things like that just, I hope, keep me growing and learning. I don't know, do we have, is that enough? You can go on?
Generally, we try and keep it short so that people can ask questions. We did come up with a few questions. And I'm just gonna include one other personal story. It's not a family member, but the first time I encountered somebody after the election who actually voted for the person I did not vote for, I was so stunned. Cause I'm in a bubble. I admit, I live in a bubble. It just is a matter of who my friends are. But the person who cut my hair, so I'm, she has her scissors on that. So she said, I voted for him, and I took a deep breath, knowing I didn't want to be confrontational. And I said, I just would like to understand. Can you tell me a little bit more? And she is a person that probably goes to the church down the street, and because she's very much into quoting the Bible and things when she was cutting my hair. And unfortunately, I had not read this book, and so I was so anxious for when my next appointment was and what I was going to say, that not only did I miss the time that I was supposed to be there, but I realized I just couldn't do it. I did not have any of the tools. If I'd had this book now, I know I could have gone back and probably started a process of having a conversation and trying to understand better and what her motivation was and listening. But I didn't have the skills. So if I go to somebody else, then I cut my hair. It thinks along the lines the way I think. But anyway, in their handouts, we could have some questions that we could start the conversation with, or if you have a question, we'll start with Mary.
Just a comment, well, and maybe a question. It sounds like what you're saying, especially as you're talking about.
Sorry.
As you speak up. Oh, hey.
I said you said it.
As you're talking about being open to learning and being curious. It seems to me that one of the personal steps that we have to take is to examine our investment in the person's response.
Yeah,
In order for us to be open to any of this, and that's really hard.
yes.
I think it's very hard, and I come from a family not as large as Dani's, but in my family, well, she has a very large, and they keep in touch. My family's all out in California, and to give you an example, in the recent months that we've been in the surge, the only person in my family to reach out to me has been my nephew, who came and visited me. So I have two brothers, I have two sisters, I've got two nieces, two nephews, so only one of those people that we come to me. And so it's not a matter, and every time we talk about, before you go to communion, you're supposed to reconcile with your siblings. I haven't done anything. I feel, I used to send them Christmas gifts and a birth card and if got anything. And I just stopped beating my head against the wall. It wasn't, I have friends and family here and they are important to me. But it is very much, when I'm reading this book, how much investment do you want to make? And I know because we had in the survey that was done by the justice team 2 weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago? There were people mentioning they want to know how to have conversations with loved ones, the people that are in their family. So this is where the question is, how much do you want to invest? Do you want to call them in because you want to keep them part of your connection? And that's everybody's personal choice. You know best. And it's kind of, there used to be an advice column this, can this marriage be saved? That would talk about, is it worth saving or is it too far gone? And only you can judge that. But it's also, you encounter people when you're out and about, whether it's a Gulf of America shirt or somebody that makes a racist comment. And how can you respond in a way that makes you comfortable and doesn't shame the other person? And that's where having it in mind, and basically assessing what's the risk and what you want to have both people feeling good at the end of the day. So, are there other? Yes, Jen.
I think not only what's the risk, but what are you dealing with? To understand it happens, and I think every family has their difficulty. But when you know the person who's from birth, you have a serious problem that you want to correct, and I wouldn't mean to at all trivialize what you're saying, because we can experience that in our own groups, and but I think it's important to know when you're concerned, for instance, if you have a medical issue that you're dealing with, and you're not the one to take care of it, but you want to facilitate it being taken care of. So that's deep and wide as far as I'm concerned. And there's no question about the importance of it.
We've all heard versions of the tell me more feeling and saying. And I have a sister who I would dearly like. In fact, she's my only remaining family of origin or something. And I don't know what I will do with what she tells me or what someone opposite will tell me. And so can anyone give some examples of what might be said by the after you've asked the question, tell me more, and then they start to try to answer you, and obviously they're feeling you out too. Do you really mean this? That kind of thing.
Well, in the book, she gives a number of examples from her work and someone challenging her and having giving that person space. But she is so equipped after all of her years in this that it feels almost amazingly natural for her to come up with the perfect response. But I think through the book, she does walk through what that whole exchange, what you're both doing. And there may be a point in that exchange, that's what I was talking about, of recognizing that person is not interested in having a conversation. They're not interested in taking in information. They need to just do it. I was thinking of is trying to find a way to humiliate you or some way shame you. And so you have to recognize, that's why to start with the self, knowing what your limitations are and knowing what your goals are, all of that. And that pausing in real time when the conflict is going on, absolutely is a challenge. But I can't just think of them offhand, but I can say she gave many examples.
Oh, good.
Someone here and
Yeah, I have a friend of, who I met back right after in college. And he's gone this way and I've gone that way. We have a long lasting friendship and, we're gonna see him in a few weeks. But what has happened, we value the friendship. And the friendship is based on a lot of things that are not necessarily political and so we kind of avoid getting into the weeds on those discussions. And if they start to go, we kind of pull them back out again. But that's a situation where even though he believes pretty strongly in political things that he believes in, he's working at, he wants to preserve the friendship. For me, the real difficulty is when you're engaging with somebody that doesn't seem to want to, it's more important for them to make their points than it is to maintain a close friendship, whether it's or a family relationship. That's to me the real challenge. And fortunately, I haven't really encountered that. But I'm really, this makes a great deal of sense.
there's so many things.
Thank you for this conversation. What I find in speaking of people or conflict resolution or relationship is before I even enter, I have to suspend my judgment of the other side, the other person, all the stuff I've made up, my self-righteousness, my better than, my I know, because there's the great monad who embraces and loves us all. And it'd be great if there were good guys over here and bad guys over here, but our global politics are far more complex than that. So I clear all my stuff, my anxiety about it, my fear, so I can go with a clean slate. So they're not bouncing off of my fear or judgment or anxiety or better than. There's a lot of better than in these conversations. And in relationship, my rule is ask for what you need, take what you get. Like, Kathy, I'd love to have lunch with you 3 times a week. And she would say, I could do it once. And I'd say, okay. Where are you with your hand up?
Yeah, and that was several minutes ago. No, I was just gonna say, it's helpful to me to remember, and not everybody's like this, but when I would make a decision to come out to someone, my first question to myself would be, is this a relationship I want? And I think that has some relevance to it.
I was thinking along those same lines about what is friendship? And or acquaintances, and knowing how much energy I have to give to others. And I had an incident a few days ago. I decided I was gonna walk to the market to get out, and I hadn't been out. I've been kind of holding out actually. And so and I was kind of uncomfortable going down to the shopping area, because I want to say I thought everything was going to be like normal, and I don't feel normal. But I was walking down the street and I saw a sign that said Northeast loves its immigrant neighbors or something like that, and I noticed it. I was like, oh, that's not nice. There was another woman walking past that sign, and she picked it up and put it on. Cool. And then I had to cross the street, and so our paths met. I'm good. My agent is talking about it. And she was right there, and I said, wow, did you just throw that sign on the ground? And then she didn't listen, she didn't want to hear anything I had to say, but I did learn that she was an angry, sad person. Angry, sad, lonely person, so no surprise, really. But, you know, I still have energy connected to that, or that. And it kind of hurt myself doing it. So it's just something I need to be aware of what I have to offer others and how much energy I can put in. So I do have a lot of friends, and I have a lot of acquaintances too. And trying to know who I can, you know, who do I want to spend the afternoon with today, and that's what that's what I'm on the piece. So appreciate this a lot.
I think it's hard when it's somebody that's a family member and you were asking, you know, how can you respond? And I think in terms of, you know, how, you know, what are the things that connect you? You know, as in the book, Loretta talks about her uncle, who she said, basically he made a racist comment. And she said, you know, I know you to be this very kind person who would run into a burning building and take care of whoever needed it. So, you know, only you know what history you have, what you can call upon in terms of, I know you this way, and when you say this, it doesn't match what I see in you. And in a way,
That's a really good way of saying it. We've been, way before Trump, we've known about this, about each other, that we're at opposite ends of the spectrum. But sometimes we just totally avoid it. And just to give you an example of using that movie, we were going through.
Excuse me, is this a friend or family or?
Oh, I'm back to my sister.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And our parents had recently moved out of their home into a much smaller place, and all of the leftovers were in her garage. And so we're going to go through them and do whatever. And I hadn't brought something that I wanted to get dirty in. So I asked to borrow a t-shirt, and she pulled one out, and it says something like patriot, the word patriot was emblazoned, and I thought it was a perfectly nice shirt. And she pulled it out, showed it to me, and she said, "Oh, you won't want that one." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And the clarity of that remark, or the striking, you know, and I said, "I absolutely am a patriot, and I want to wear that shirt." And then I just shut my mouth. But that's, you know, I sometimes wonder if that break is still so bad. But we just plain avoid it.
it's whatever works in terms of family dynamic and what
Yeah,
relationships you want to continue.
exactly.
Yes, Roger.
I think one of you made a comment about a dialogue. A dialogue won't work. But on the point of a dialogue is not to get your position heard, but to understand the other's position so well that when you repeat it, they can say, yes, that's what I believe. And so I couple that thought with our focus on the way of love. And it's really much that the other person is not our responsibility, but we need to be present and listen to them and not try to make points. It's our incarnate presence is Jesus that'll make the difference, not particularly the words that we're saying. So to me, there's a whole perspective to this that's based on our fundamental Christian values that we're not talking about.
in terms of the book, um, we did come up with a few questions. And I mean, keeping track of the time, because I know people are gonna have to peel off here. I think I'm gonna look at the fourth question on your handout. Because we've had conversations in other gatherings here at St. John's about people having very strong feelings about the individuals that have been in our city. So I'm gonna throw this out for you all to kind of think about, rolls around in your head. Can you imagine a conversation you might have with one of them using the techniques of calling in? And Phil already raised his hand, but
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is, where are you from, you know? What is this, in other words, engage him in a sense of, I say him, because, you know, we think of ice and they're all sort of husky males. And find out where you from and what's it, you know, and get him to talk about where he's from and his family and what is the usual sort of point of reference is, in a way of a connection, if you will. To me, that's an obvious thing when you meet somebody in a place where they are the stranger and you ask them about themselves and where they're from and learn something about that. And I think that's an easy way to make a bridge or a connection.
Depends on his posture, however, if he's
Well-
his knees on your neck.
Well, no, that's not what I was thinking about.
Well,
But if you bumped into him in the store or, you know, or just standing on the sidewalk or something like that.
yes, Jan.
well, finding common ground, I think, is really important. And that's, first of all, taking a few deep breaths and thinking rather than just reacting. Because we've had a lot of opportunity to do that, I think. But Catherine Lewis is one of the priests in our diocese. And she was on TV, she was with the priest who have at the airport. And we know her pretty well. And she said exactly what I expect her to say, because she was arrested. And she said, man who arrested me actually was quite kind. And it was very, you know, it's natural for her to approach things that way, because she had, growing up, she had experiences with her family, all beginning jumping in the car and leaving town because things were so rough. But you know, I think maybe part of the lesson here is to make things normative for yourself. You know, taking those steps, and you can try. I think it's possible to train yourself based on your upbringing, and then becoming a parent, for instance, and learning from teachers and others. And I find there's always time to learn.
I think Dan.
Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just had an observation.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know. I grew up in the 50s, and I think back over my life and where I you know, when you're talking about calling in versus calling out, I think back over the positions I've had, like yesterday I went to see Kiss Me Kate, the great musical. I loved it. But there is some really problematic incidences in there about abuse of power. You know, and when I first saw it, you know, when I back in the 50s and 60s, I didn't notice that. Now I notice it. When I was a kid growing up, you know, my relationship to the LGBTQ well, they didn't even call it that. It was homosexuals, right? And our attitudes, my attitude towards homosexuals is vastly different now than it was back then. So I think when I'm trying to build relationships with people who I disagree with, I try to think back, how did I talk to myself so that my opinions and my, what I would do calling out, how has that changed? How would I want to deal with my own self? The Episcopal Church, if you know a lot of churches, there's a Southern Baptist and the Northern Baptist, and a lot of churches split during the Civil War. There was the ones in the South, and the Episcopal Church didn't do that. They found a way to come together. And I'm trying to think of not burning bridges. Right now, I think the news yesterday or the day before was talking about the huge 50% swing in opinions among the 34 to 18-year-olds and among the Latinos as their attitudes towards Trump. So how do I want to talk to people who I would, violently disagree with their opinions, but realize that, 5 years from now, we're all going to be still here, hopefully. And how am I going to live in community with them? And how am I living in community with the person, the prejudiced, male chauvinist, anti-gay person that I was back in the 60s and 70s? So that's my observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And I know we're getting close because people are starting to feel off. So I think I'm just gonna close with emphasizing the message that Bishop Loya continually shares, which is to love, and that love is stronger than hate. And I think anytime we can look at the humanity in another person, that even though we disagree with them, they have been shaped by their lives. Their lives have formed how they view things. And while we may not change them, if we can at least open our arms in love and just be there to listen, not judge, and especially to someone that you're close to someone you love, find those things that you remember you shared joy together in some manner. And for those of us who've gotten older, you might have to dig pretty far back, but it's an opportunity. And I'm just going to close by mentioning the book group is going to be starting this in the first week of March. And if you're not able to join us for the book group, but at least want to read the book and then look at the questions and we'll be discussing, it really does give you a perspective and a toolkit to help in terms of engaging with people that you don't agree with, but you still love. So thank you for coming, and we'll be here for a few more minutes. I just know that 10 o'clock is starting and people have to get to church. So thank you for being part of the conversation.